The UFC is much like any other pro sport and league. Sportsmen come and sportsmen go, and they do so for a variety of reasons. But right now, the UFC seems to be experiencing an unusual exodus of top fighters. Before we get to that, let's look at why fighters leave the league. Financial reasons are often at the top of a disgruntled fighter's list. Demetrius Johnson is a case in point. Despite being considered one of the greatest fighters in the promotion's history, he was unhappy. He felt his pay in the UFC wasn't up to scratch, and he felt that he was not being compensated fairly. In 2018, Johnson was traded to one championship.
Slightly smaller movements. Oh, big right, DJ! They stunned it! Big knee! That's it!
Where he reportedly received a more lucrative deal and the opportunity to compete in Asia. Another reason why fighters may leave the UFC is due to contractual disagreements.
Demetrius trying to choke it! Can he get it? Can he get it? It's good night, Irene!
One example is Rory McDonald, who was a top welterweight contender in the UFC. This was before he signed with Bellator in 2016. McDonald cited issues with the UFC's Reebok deal. He wanted more control over his own sponsorship deals. Ultimately, this is why he left.
Head kick, and it was blocked, but it still got through enough to stun Robbie Lawler.
Personal reasons also sometimes play a role in fighters' decisions to leave the UFC. Former UFC bantamweight champion DJ Dillashaw left the promotion in 2019. He had to serve a 2-year suspension for using performance-enhancing drugs. Dillashaw later cited personal growth and a desire to become a better person and athlete as the reasons why he left the UFC.
When I'm competing or when I'm getting ready for a fight or even still an active roster, I really believe that's how you got to become to be the best.
Then there are performance-related issues. Anthony Johnson was a top light heavyweight contender before leaving the division in 2017. He cited a lack of motivation and his struggles to lose weight as the main reasons for retiring. But he later came out of retirement and signed with Bellator in 2020 to compete as a heavyweight.
Good exchange from both men. Gets him to the canvas. And Arlovski down again.
William Knight, also known as Nightmare, is a former professional mixed martial artist. He competed in the light heavyweight division of the UFC. Knight made his debut in the promotion in 2020. He quickly established himself as a promising fighter with a powerful striking game.
The way he's moving back.
It's irresponsible, man. That's very...
And a relentless fighting style. However, despite his early success, Knight left the UFC in late 2021 for several reasons. One of the primary motivations for Knight leaving the UFC was financial. As a relatively new and unknown fighter in the promotion, Knight was not earning the kind of money that he felt he deserved. According to reports, Knight was making a base salary of only $12,000 per fight, which was not enough to support himself and his family. Knight expressed his frustration with the UFC's pay structure in several interviews and social media posts, and ultimately decided to part ways with the promotion in search of better financial opportunities. Another factor that may have contributed to Knight's departure from the UFC was his record in the promotion. Although Knight won his first 3 fights in the UFC, he suffered back-to-back losses in the last 2 outings, which may have hurt his standings in the organization. Despite his exciting fighting style and knockout power, Knight was still a relatively unproven commodity in the UFC, and his recent losses may have made it more difficult for him to earn bigger fights and more money in the promotion. Knight may also have left the UFC due to personal reasons. He has spoken candidly about the challenges of balancing his fighting career with his role as a father and husband. Jordan Wright, also known as the Beverly Hills Ninja, made his UFC debut in 2020. His striking prowess and knockout power quickly became his trademarks. However, Wright's time in the UFC was short-lived, and he was released from the promotion in 2022. Performance-related issues probably contributed. Despite his impressive debut, Wright struggled in his next 2 fights, losing to Joaquin Buckley and Bruno Silva. While losses are not uncommon in MMA, the UFC is known for having high standards for its fighters. A string of losses can sometimes lead to a fighter's release. There were also contractual disagreements. While the details of Wright's contract with the UFC are not public, it's possible that he and the promotion were unable to agree on certain terms, such as pay or the number and frequency of his fights.
He tries to push him away, misses, left hook to the button, puts him down, and follows up with the left. 3 more lefts and he's out cold.
Lena Landsberg is a Swedish mixed martial artist who made her UFC debut in 2016. She had a successful start in the UFC, winning her first 2 fights, but ultimately decided to leave the organization in 2019. Several factors contributed to her decision to leave the UFC. Most prominently, she wanted to focus on her family. And then there was also her outspoken dissatisfaction with the UFC's treatment of fighters. In an interview, Landsberg stated that she wanted to spend more time with her young daughter. Traveling for fights made it difficult to do so. Like many other fighters, Landsberg was also frustrated with the low pay and lack of support from the UFC. She frequently expressed her belief that fighters should be paid more and that the UFC should do more to support them. She also criticized the UFC's ranking system, which she felt was unfair and did not accurately reflect the skill level of fighters. Said Yakub Kakramanov is a former UFC fighter from Uzbekistan. He made his debut in the organization in 2021. Despite a lightning start in the UFC, Kakramanov decided to leave the organization after just 1 fight. Several factors and incidents contributed to his decision to leave, including his desire for better pay and his frustration with the lack of opportunities for fighters. He believed that fighters should be paid more for their efforts and that the UFC's current pay structure is unfair.
Why everybody gets rescheduled right away and I don't get rescheduled right away for 9 months? Bro, I gotta make money. I have family, bro. Like,
he also said that he had financial obligations to his family that he needed to meet and that the pay he received from the UFC was not enough to support them. He also decried the lack of opportunities for fighters in the organization. Kakramanov felt that the UFC was not giving him the chances to fight that he deserved and that he was not being promoted or marketed as well as he should have been. The fighter believed that he had the skills and talent to succeed in the UFC, but that the organization was not giving him the opportunities he needed to prove himself. Dana White has seen many fighters come and go from the UFC and has had various reactions to these departures. When it comes to the recent exodus of fighters from the UFC, White has had mixed reactions, and it's difficult to gauge whether he's seeing it as a crisis or even taking it seriously. On one hand, he's expressed frustration with fighters who choose to go. In interviews, he's criticized fighters who leave the organization for what he sees as greener pastures, suggesting they are not committed to the UFC or the sport of mixed martial arts. White has also argued that the UFC provides fighters with the best opportunities and exposure, and that leaving the organization is a mistake. At the same time, however, White has also acknowledged that the UFC needs to do more to retain its top talent. In interviews, he stated that the UFC is working to improve its pay structure and its support for fighters. All of this was to keep them happy and motivated. White has expressed a willingness to negotiate with fighters who want to leave the UFC to find a resolution that benefits everyone involved. Overall, White's reaction to the exodus of fighters from the UFC has been complex and varied. It doesn't seem to have a pattern. As the sport of mixed martial arts continues to evolve, it will be interesting to see how White and the UFC respond to these challenges and opportunities. We'll catch you in the next video, folks.